Hey, welcome to Film Fanatics, three film geeks discussing movies both new and old. My name is Dan.
My name is Justin.
And I'm Joe.
Before we get started this week, I want to thank all of our faithful listeners to the show. We have gotten over 100 views on our very first video by this point. We're up to, at last count, 104, so we want to thank everybody for listening. That's the first official count over 100. We do have a video up from when we reviewed the Vin Diesel movie Triple X that Joe brought us, and I happened to title it The Triple X Show, and due to that it's gotten over 500 views, but I don't think those are legitimate film fanatic viewers.
Hey, whatever gets the buzz going.
I guess so.
But definitely big thanks to everybody out there. If you have not subscribed yet to our YouTube channel, go ahead and do that. We'd love to hear that. And in just a few weeks, we'll have another listener-requested movie for our old classic. So start thinking about what you guys might want to hear us review on the old classics lot in a couple of weeks. And let's get on with the show. Hopefully by now you've caught our mini-sode where we give our revised top 20s for 2013 and our Oscar predictions with collaborator to the show Tim. If you haven't, go ahead and check that out now on our YouTube channel. You can see how close our Oscar predictions were, as that show has aired by now. This week on the show, not too much in the new release department, a couple of holdovers from last week, and the new Kevin Costner movie 3 Days to Kill. Our triple feature is new classic Thin Ice starring Greg Kinnear, Justin's old classic pick in tribute to Philip Seymour Hoffman, Mary and Max, and the Oscar nominee A to Z this week is Ali starring Will Smith. And inspired by that film, our top 5 this week is professional fighting films. First though, much like the Frozen sing-along a few weeks ago, we now have another new version of a film being re-released in theaters, though this one is actually much more than just putting lyrics up on the bottom of the screen. It's the R-rated cut of Anchorman 2. And unlike when rated films get released on DVD in an unrated version and there's like 40 seconds of additional material, the R-rated Anchorman is almost a new movie entirely, with more than 700 new jokes and gags added to the mix. It's supposed to be a 1 week only kind of viewing, so I don't know. Thoughts, Justin? What do you think of that?
When I thought about it, I was thinking it was a really cool idea, but I also thought this is kind of a reverse from what a lot of movies did in the past. The one that always comes to mind for me is Saturday Night Fever. The original version came out as R, and then they cut it to PG because they wanted more people to see it. I think it's a little bit interesting that they're altering that to support possibly the older fan base reaching it. I'm not sure if it's going to work out the way they want it to, but I think it's a cool idea. I hope it works out for them.
I didn't really think it had much to do with the older fan base. I just get the sense that, a lot of the scenes they do are improv, and I guess the jokes that they decided to use for the first version were more of a PG-13 variety, and maybe the jokes that they've thrown into this one are a little more curse-heavy or whatever. I don't think they specifically, were trying, hey, let's go for a different audience. I mean, they've always said in interviews, even before the movie came out, that there's enough material to release a 2.5 on DVD, kind of like the Jackass crew does with their movies. Right. So I guess maybe because the original was so successful, they decided let's
up the ante.
I guess they figured they probably cut it together for DVD release anyway, so they already had spent the money for the extra editing. Why not put it out in theaters? Joe, what do you think?
I think it's an interesting ploy to get more cash, but I feel like it's not going to do very well because everybody already saw the second film and it was kind of an okay reception, but I don't think people liked it enough to go out and see this in droves.
And that's usually what happens with these kind of things. I mean,
how long is this movie going to be then if there's 700 new jokes and gags?
2 hours about.
It's a lot of material to fit in. I think I might be interesting to see the new cut, but I don't know. I'm not that excited about it personally.
I'm interested to see at least what they do with it. Like, I don't know. Justin mentioned to me earlier that there's a musical number now. I'm interested to see how the basic plot of the film is changed. Is it all pretty much the same thing with just different punchlines? 700 new gags is a lot.
That means like there's whole scenes that were just removed, but changed, which could affect the plot, make it a very different movie. But for some reason, I feel like that's not going to be the case. I'd be very surprised if it was changed significantly. I think it's just going to be a lot of stuff crammed in there to get it a higher rating, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, we'll see how it does, I guess. I'm going to try and see it.
All right.
In theaters.
Same as well.
And maybe if we all see it, we can talk about it a little bit next week on the show.
Okay.
All right, but let's get to this week's new release slate. And last week we did a couple of these 80s reboots. We had About Last Night and RoboCop. And now we've got one more held over from Valentine's weekend that we did not get to last week, and that is Endless Love. Justin's going to tell us about that.
David Elliott, played by Alex Pettyfer, has spent all 4 years of his high school career trying and failing to talk to beautiful introvert Jade Butterfield, played by Gabriella Wilde. Though when Jade decides to throw a graduation party in an attempt to make more friends, David sees his opportunity and the two begin to fall in love, much to the dismay of Jade's father Hugh, played by Bruce Greenwood. There's nary a cliche spared in this awful remake of an 80s film that got about as much poor reception, and the awful acting in the film doesn't do it any favors either. Character development is rarely present in the film, and when it is there, it often comes off like a second-rate soap opera. Along with that, the actions of these characters are so irrational and goofy, it makes an already painful film significantly worse, particularly from Greenwood's character getting increasingly ridiculous as the film progresses. Valentine's Day has rarely been the best time for good cinema, but Endless Love is truly one of the worst, and I give it an F.
Joe, what do you feel about Endless Love?
This movie seems to be about young, passionate love and the fear parents have about letting their children grow up. My feelings about it are incredibly mixed. The movie actually has an okay, if not very cliche story, with some good acting by some great performances from the cast, particularly the supporting actors, including Bruce Greenwood of the recent Star Trek reboot, and Robert Patrick, best known as the T-1000, as well as Jolie Richardson. I feel that this film was very confused in how it was trying to make us feel about the people in the story. It seemed that one moment they would be acting irresponsible and doing unlikable things, but then a scene or two later you would feel bad for them. Admittedly, the actions do seem to have some stem in reality, though it often deviates. I also can't really condone the actions of the main characters as being good role models for young people, who the film is mainly aimed at. Also, I don't know if the actions of the film truly lead to the appropriate consequences. Still, Endless Love does have a hint of realism at times, and surprisingly didn't bore me. Plus, I think as escapist fantasy, if not taken too seriously, it might be alright for the appropriate viewer, I guess. Still, it wasn't really that great for me, and I give Endless Love a D+.
I am not even sure where to start. There's like 20 minutes in the middle of the movie that it seemed like all of the awfulness from the first 45 minutes might have actually been building to something, leading somewhere. But then you get the last 45 minutes, and it's just all a mess again. As you said, Joe, we had talked about this very briefly when you were watching it. The only character that's worth anything is Jade's mother, which is the Jolie Richardson character. Though between this and her appearance in Vampire Academy, she may want to talk to her agent. But David's dad, played by Robert Patrick, is a pretty good one as well. I'll
Wasn't
admit
that bad.
Yeah. The comic relief from David's friend not only is obnoxious, but then he turns out to be a really lousy friend, and yet David still wants him in his life. That story was terrible. You would just lose your mind trying to figure out the logic of what some of these characters are doing and why. I give the filmmakers credit for changing the ending from the original film and book. I haven't seen it or read it, but I heard it was different, so I did my research, and it's somehow even worse than the way the 2014 version ends, but it still really isn't any good. The movie was obviously tailor-made for Valentine's weekend, which is why it dropped 70% in its second weekend from its already underwhelming debut, and the middle section isn't enough to get it up to a D+, so I leave it in the middle of you guys with just a D. Not a lot to redeem it here.
It's pretty bad.
Right.
I thought the
justification.
the performances were pretty good from some of the people.
Yeah, some of the people had decent performances.
I guess the sad thing about the movie for me was that you guys both mentioned, I think we all mentioned, how the characters in the movies just act so irrational and stupid.
Yeah.
But the sad thing is I could kind of see people in those situations doing that and acting that way, which I guess is one reason why I gave the film a little bit more slack. I don't know if that's really a good model for a film, but I'm like, I can't say that it's completely unrealistic.
But let's take it from what you mentioned in your review. If they're going to do that, I'm fine with that. And it makes sense. Teenage recklessness, yada yada yada.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't help that they keep alternating between rationality and irrationality. And second, they should at least have the consequences if they're going to act that irrational.
Yeah, that's one thing that really confused me. It's like, I think I mentioned in my review that the characters would just completely change their perspectives. Like Robert Patrick, at one point after, I think the father has a restraining order or something, and Robert Patrick's like, okay, I gotta set things straight. Butterfield, you can't come near my son. I gotta look out for both you guys. You gotta just move on with your life, go to college.
And 10 minutes later,
he's like, you know what, son? I'm gonna fight for you. Call her. Let him try to put a restraining order against me.
Right.
Like,
take everything we have. Go get her.
I'm like,
what?
Where did you?
Why?
Where did this logic come? And that's just bad writing.
Yeah.
Like, you didn't even have like a scene to show him thinking about his wife, and I mean, I get what they were trying to do, but it wasn't really pursued at all correctly, and it's just.
Well, that's why the only person I really, really liked was Jade's mother, because
she was consistent.
She was consistent the whole movie, and her character's actions at least kind of made sense. She was obviously in her own sort of loveless marriage. You know, the husband's cheating on her, whether she knows or not is irrelevant, but she obviously is feeling they're not as close. She sees young love, you know, in her daughter, and she wants her to be happy, and it's like that all made complete sense.
Yeah.
But everyone around her just was, I don't know what they were doing.
Makes me wonder how the original is. I don't know if I really want to check it out, but I'm curious if they were slightly more logical.
I'll never watch the original after this.
Well,
you can't make me.
To be fair, though, I mean, usually remakes aren't as good, you know?
Doesn't mean the source material's any better.
I agree with that, but after reading how the original one ends, which is even stupider than this...
Well, I know it's based on a book, so that's probably... If
Yeah.
that's the original story for the book and the characters added anything like that, that's probably not that well written of a novel.
It probably isn't.
But somebody adapted it, so
Yeah,
they thought
twice.
Oh.
All right, well, moving on is 3 Days to Kill, the new Kevin Costner film, and one of several that we're going to get this year. And Joe's going to tell us about that.
3 Days to Kill. It's a 2014 action thriller directed by Mick G. Can't do it with a straight face. I actually had to do a double take when I looked that up. I was like, all right. It stars Kevin Costner as a CIA agent named Ethan Renner, who is terminally ill. Coaxed out of retirement for one last job, he is dispatched to catch a terrorist named The Wolf, very creative name, in exchange for a new experimental drug which may save his life. Tell me if you've heard this plot before anywhere. All the while, Renner attempts to watch over his daughter while his wife is out of town. Well, that's the synopsis. It may seem brief, but that's really all there is. This movie is sort of a balance between a spy movie with some family drama, kind of like a really, really weak version of True Lies. This movie is extremely generic and seems to come right with every spy thriller cliche in the book, from the soon-to-be retired agent, the generic villain with the most uncreative name ever, and the supermodel femme fatale, who is just about the most unrealistic character ever. With the exception of some okay action scenes and a few semi-clever lines, there really is nothing particularly good about this movie. However, the acting is so terrible, and the dialogue so horrible, and the script so bland, that the whole movie is actually awesomely bad. It's just hilarious. I was actually very entertained by how exceptionally bland everything in this movie was. I don't know if I'd recommend it to most, but if you want an awesomely bad movie, going into it with that knowledge, I assure you, you will be entertained. So, surprisingly, I give 3 Days to Kill a D.
Yeah, I thought it was going F for a while there.
It was, but I'm telling you, once I caught on to the joke, it was just amazing.
The unintentional
I couldn't
joke.
hold back the laughter.
Justin, what did you think of 3 Days to Kill?
The action genre is constantly oversaturated with seen-before narratives told in a number of different ways, and 3 Days to Kill does little to change that. The inclusion of Kevin Costner and young talent Haley Steinfeld might make one think this might be better than average, but instead it just keeps it from becoming any more familiar and messier than it already is. It doesn't help that the film has no clue what story it wants to tell, from its race against time thriller to father and daughter drama and even dark action comedy. Out of all these concepts, the only one that's even remotely interesting is the father and daughter story that serves as a brief, sort of escapist moment from the chaotic and frenetic nature of the rest of the overall film. While I still believe that writer Luc Besson still has another Leon the Professional left in him, 3 Days to Kill was definitely not the way to go, and I give it a D+.
He did have another one. It was called Taken, and
Nice.
that's it.
That guy has done a couple really amazing movies that I love, and everything else I'm just like, that's really the same guy?
There was Nikita, there was Leon, and then I guess Taken he wrote, and that was about it.
His last directing was The Family, which was average,
it was
I
at
think.
best.
Let's say that.
I liked it, but it was a mess.
Coming from the world of music videos, it's no surprise that McG brings an MTV pace style to most of his work, including both the Charlie's Angels movies. But with 3 Days to Kill, he seems to not know exactly what to do. The script doesn't call for anything with that kind of pacing, and the few action scenes that there are completely bogged down with this father-daughter story that I'm guessing was supposed to really pull at the heartstrings of Costner's aging fan base. I guess it worked for Justin, did not work for me at all. The comedy associated with it also fell flat. With a couple of exceptions, the action also was fairly unthrilling. Also, Amber Heard proves her complete awfulness once again. We had Machete Kills, we had Paranoia.
The Rum Diary for you.
Oh, God, yeah, I forgot she was even in that. The Rum Diary.
She's pretty bad.
She's engaged to Johnny Depp, so, obviously
What does that tell you?
Yeah. Take your own thought on that. The nod to Costner's The Bodyguard, in which he carries his daughter out of a club a la Whitney Houston, was a nice touch. But other than that, I have to leave 3 Days to Kill, like Justin, with a D+. Not really much going on there.
There's really not much to say. It's like the most predictable. Like it's so generic that it's not even average. I mean, there's like very little heart in this movie at all. It's just kind of like cookie cutter segments put together.
Well, I feel like if it was generic, it would at least have a direction.
I think, like I said,
but there's like so much that they're attempting to do and failing at all of it.
The family comedy / drama stuff was very underdeveloped, actually. Even though I think it was supposed to be the focus in the movie, but I don't really...
And it could have been interesting if they had actually fleshed it out, but they didn't.
No, I mean, that was, I think, supposed to be the center, but like you guys said, there wasn't enough focus.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, let's move on. Not a great slate this week of new releases.
Really not very exciting.
Our next one is Winter's Tale, and Justin's going to tell us about that.
God.
Ooh, fun. Peter Lake, played by Colin Farrell, is a thief scrounging to survive when he decides to rob the estate of a young but dying woman named Beverly Penn, played by Jessica Brown Finlay, who makes him reconsider his lifestyle and embrace his destiny. However, when he gets ambushed by his enemy, the demonic policeman Pearly Soaks, played by Russell Crowe in one of his worst performances of all time, he ends up in present-day 2014 and tries to find Beverly's new reincarnation to fulfill his destiny. Winter's Tale is a great example of when a film goes for originality and instead it goes horribly, horribly wrong. The narrative of a love story fused with a fantasy parallel story involving angels and demons, including one of the worst miscasts of recent years, sounds interesting, but instead it ends up being awkward and confusing, particularly in attempting to figure out just what is going on, such as evident in the first 15 minutes. Granted, the film makes a bit more sense as it goes along, but instead of drawing intrigue and fascinating the audience, like in the often considered equally confusing Cloud Atlas, it just makes one wish that they had made it easier to follow instead of making one frustrated. This is partially at fault from the narrative spending far too much time in the past, then when it gets to the present, everything just comes off as rushed and clumsy. Though Winter's Tale has major issues throughout, and some appalling CGI to boot, I do applaud a film for at least attempting some degree of originality, and as such, I give Winter's Tale a D+.
Well, I thought that 3 Days to Kill was kind of a miss with how that was marketed. It didn't really seem like there was going to be a father-daughter story there. But Winter's Tale really caught me off guard with all the fantasy. I knew about Peter's character living more than 100 years without aging. That we saw in the trailer. But, I mean, we've seen things like that before in Time Traveler's Wife, for example. But with Winter's Tale, all the demons and the Satan stuff was completely, out of the blue for me. And that they're completely nonsensical didn't help matters at all, like Justin alluded to. To say nothing of the apparently 104-year-old woman who still works full-time as a higher-up at the newspaper. What? I didn't... like, what? It's just one of the many inconsistencies and completely ridiculous things.
One heck of a pension.
In a movie full of them. Also, Will Smith as Satan is destined to be one of the most bizarre cameos of the year.
Really was.
And Russell Crowe continues to prove that he lost all of his talent a decade ago. All that being said, the romance at the heart of the film isn't completely awful, and Jennifer Connelly continues to prove that even in a minor role, she can up the ante of a movie by a few percent. It is interesting to note that, much like Endless Love, this one also dropped 70% in its post-Valentine's Day weekend, which in itself was very disappointing. And I also leave Winter's Tale with a D+. Joe?
Right off the bat, I feel that this movie was incredibly cheesy, primarily with the dialogue. Seriously, every moment of this movie just seemed corny and overly cutesy, and that really got under my skin. I don't really think it was for me. Still, despite this, I did like the historical setting of the part of the story, and though it is a bit overbearing, the supernatural elements are at least a bit of a departure from the norm, even if we have seen it done better in other films. Originality only goes so far, though, as the pacing in this film will take most of the interest away from a potentially compelling narrative. Colin Farrell isn't giving his best performance, or even his worst. He's just okay. Jennifer Connelly seems to be there as well, mostly. Russell Crowe's villain was actually kind of a bright spot for me, since I kind of liked the good crime boss and, the over-the-top fashion. It's kind of awesomely bad. Of all the performances...
recurring theme.
Yeah, of all the performances, yes. Jessica Brown Findlay was the one that made me cringe the most, though probably because of the awful dialogue she was forced to spew. This movie might have had some magic for some people as innocent escapism despite its confusing plot. For me, it really wasn't that much fun, and I leave it with a D.
I can't believe that you thought Russell Crowe gave a decent performance. He was just so awful in this.
Awfully amazing.
No, not even that.
His accent was great, man.
And I have to say, the makeup of this movie was horrible.
It was like bad directed DVD. Not even directed DVD. It was like sci-fi original.
I think I kind of liked the costumes, though. They were all right.
Costumes were okay. Makeup
costumes were okay.
Particularly for the demons, was bad.
Yeah, the demon makeup was pretty.
The CGI
terrible.
For the horse was terrible.
I don't know why they CGI'd a horse. I mean, you could buy a horse, right?
I think the horse itself was real. I just mean like the wings and stuff.
In some parts.
I was going to say
was it partially CGI?
I think it was partially CGI in some scenes.
The scene on the bridge, I think, given the stunt work, they probably had to go CGI.
Huh. Either way, it looked terrible.
It was just not very. It didn't seem like that bright of a film either. I don't know. It was just very dim.
Well, and I don't understand why they did the whole 100 years thing if they're going to have the 104-year-old woman. Just make it 90 years, 80 years. So at least it's plausible that this woman, who was a centennial at this point, is still running a newspaper? Like, it didn't make any sense.
Maybe she's taking her vitamins, man. Maybe she started when she was like 6, and I don't know. It
was just one like confusing plot hole after the other, and you never caught up with them because you just didn't know what was happening.
It was a mess.
Yeah,
truly.
Did you guys know about the whole fantasy?
I knew.
Thing
I thought there was like some
reincarnation
timeline thing, but the demon thing completely knew nothing about.
Same.
Yeah. So, I don't know. Valentine's weekend isn't the time to put this kind of a movie out, so I think they buried that, in the marketing.
It did have like a slight hint of something magical, but it was so bland you didn't really know.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there were just a huge variety of people that went into it that would have been completely surprised about it. Like different age groups, different variations. I don't know.
Easily.
And to have Will Smith in your movie and not even advertise it.
Well, think about it this way. I have a feeling, this is just a hunch, but I feel like Will Smith didn't really want to advertise that he was in this movie. Maybe that was part of the clause.
Oh, maybe that was part of
because he was like
the contract.
As the judge, I believe he was slotted as.
That was,
okay.
So, I mean, I think that Will Smith being advertised would have been very distracting to the rest of the tone, the setting of the movie.
Yes, the way they advertised to throw Will Smith in.
Would have been like, and by the way, like, cameo Will Smith in.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. I think it would have thrown people off.
And again, Jennifer Connelly was like a prominent part of the advertising, and she didn't even show up for like an hour.
She was
and
barely
a half.
in the movie. When she was in there, she had like 20 minutes of screen time.
I know.
If that.
So, I think they knew it was a big
Bomb.
stinker,
Yeah.
and they said, look, let's try to cobble something together. We spent $60 million to make it. Let's at least try to make something back.
Save a little face.
I'll be honest,
Yeah.
I thought the trailers didn't really make it look that compelling either.
I didn't either.
No. So, I mean,
So it failed on
it's no
both
runner,
aspects.
it's no runner trailer.
No, that was good trailer, terrible movie.
It really was. Great trailer. One of the best.
All right, our final movie in the new release segment of our show is our home media moment, and that is Austenland. In this romantic comedy, Kerry Russell stars as Pride and Prejudice obsessed Jane Hayes and has spent most of her life swooning over the Mr. Darcy character from that book, even more specifically, Colin Firth's portrayal in the 1995 film version of the book, and she's constantly hoping for someone like him to sweep her off her feet. Against her best friend's urging, Jane decides to spend her entire life savings on a trip to England to a Jane Austen-themed resort called Austenland. And there she finds out from the head of Austenland, Mrs. Wattlesbrook, played by Jane Seymour, that Jane bought the cheapest package possible and doesn't get nearly the amenities that the other guests receive. Still, she is promised a fixed-up romance by the end of her stay as part of the package, but she starts to fall for real for another member of the staff. Austenland's biggest problem, other than not being all that funny and desperately trying to be, is that it seems to be poking fun at Austen and the source material, while at the same time attempting to craft a similar story. I have to think that the Shannon Hale book that this is based on is better solely because the reader would be able to imagine the resort and its clientele and its employees and give them more life better than this film did. The romances within the film are all right at best, and Georgia King, recently seen in NBC's The New Normal, here as one of the guests, Lady Amelia Hartright, very well helps to hold together the stories around her, and Jane Seymour is also a bright spot. But just the chemistry wasn't there. The writing was, I thought, disrespectful to the Austen legacy, and Jennifer Coolidge, as another one of the guests, who is one of my favorite comedic actresses of her generation, is thoroughly wasted here, and her shtick gets old within the first 20 minutes or so. I give Austenland a C-. Joe?
I actually kind of enjoy the Jane Austen related stories I've seen, mostly films, so I can appreciate that fandom as I can most others. I also think that theme parks can be pretty fun as well. However, should the two ever be combined? I don't know, but this movie doesn't really help this cause. I don't really know what to say about this one. Even fans of Jane Austen would probably be offended. The whole concept of the movie is just too strange to get behind, and the main character is not really one you can get behind either. Still, the movie does have some originality in its concept, and some decent performances, but it still comes off as very odd and loses momentum surprisingly fast. It intrigued a bit, but only for about 20 minutes or so. I give it a D+.
Justin, your thoughts on Austenland?
Oh, you weren't kidding on how much you did not like this movie.
Nope.
But let's get to my review.
Hey, it's the best grade he's given so far. Well, tied, I guess, for the best grade. Hopefully it'll get better from here.
The overall theme of Austenland deals with coming to terms with what's really important about life and what is not. And ironically enough, the film suffers from the very message it's trying to hit home. Much like in Austen's novels, the film does make an attempt at social commentary, but more often than most, it just feels superficial. The film constantly seems to think that it's funnier than it actually is, and the non-stop onslaught of British accent jokes makes the film a slog to get through by the end of the first act. However, what Austenland does have going for it is Kerry Russell's attempt to embrace the spirit of the concept and often getting the best bits in the overall film. Sadly, it cannot save the film from being anything more than date movie fluff, but it at least keeps it from being completely unwatchable, and like Dan, I will also give it a C-.
I like Kerry Russell.
I do too.
All of the movies, well, I should say most of the movies I've seen her in, she's just a very likable presence. And I do think that she brought something as much as she could to the material. I sort of liked the way her character started out. Once the script sort of started falling apart, it was hard to keep up, but I think she did her best with what she had, and I do like the concept of it.
Yeah.
I do think, if I was this kind of a person, I would love to go to a Jane. I would love to go to a Simpsons themed resort. That would be cool.
You kind of mentioned something I think really bothered me about the movie is that I think that it was trying to pay homage to Jane Austen, but it seemed like it was really making fun of it.
That was one of my biggest problems with it.
And I thought that it was just kind of offensive, and I felt like it was honestly, as you said, disrespecting the material, of a great writer.
Right.
And I just think that's one thing
While
that
at the
felt flat.
same time trying to emulate it.
And be funny, and that's another problem too. I just found it really pretentious and lifeless, and I thought that a lot of people didn't really have that much chemistry. Like the beats didn't hit very well for the comedic timing or anything.
No, and I said about the chemistry in my review. I just thought none of the people really had chemistry with each other, except for kind of Kerry Russell and Jane Seymour when they had their back and forths. But you got to give us something more to work with than that. All right, well that wraps up our worst new release slate ever. We've never had a new release slate where not one of us gives any of the movies a positive grade.
Viewers, I am so sorry.
Yeah,
this sucks.
We deal with the movies that come out, unfortunately. So hopefully, within the next couple of weeks, we'll have a couple of good ones.
Maybe,
we don't know.
After this week, we have to truly.
Gotta be at least one good one.
Hope for something.
Well, if nothing else, we'll try to at least get a good home media moment.
Yes.
if there's nothing decent coming out in theaters.
All I can say is, like I said, if you want Awesomely Bad, 3 Days to Kill, just go with that attitude,
that's the one.
And you will love it. Just enjoy it.
That's the takeaway from Joe.
And that's horrible, but that's all I got.
All right, well, we're going to be reviewing the Oscar-nominated movie Ali later on in the program, and that is a biopic of Muhammad Ali starring Will Smith. Inspired by that, our top 5 this week is professional fighting movies. You got your boxing, you've got your wrestling, MMA maybe, and, some other things in the mix, possibly some martial arts. As long as it is in a professional circuit, we can call it fair game for the list. Let's start with Justin for this one. He was very excited about his list earlier to me, so I'm excited to hear what's on it.
All right, let's get started. Number 5, Red Belt. This is a little-known film from 2008 that's rarely talked about, and it's really kind of a pity. This was the first time I really got to see the true acting talent of Chiwetel Ejiofor, and it really brings a lot of life to the world of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in terms of professional fighting and things like that. I really liked his character's philosophy of going into a match, and if he always makes his fighters choose a marble. If you get a white marble, you're allowed to fight free-handed. If you get a black marble, you have to spin this chart, and whatever body part you land on, you have to utilize that as a handicap. For example, if you land on a left arm, you can't use that, and it's tied behind your back. It's really an underrated film, and I absolutely recommend it.
Is that a real thing, that marble thing? That's very interesting.
That's cool.
I don't know if it is a real thing.
I could see that being real,
but I could definitely see it. My number 4 is The Wrestler. This truly shows off the talent of Mickey Rourke through the lens of Darren Aronofsky, and it really shows. It captures the superficial side of professional wrestling, and actually capturing also the vicious consequences of it as well. However, wrestling is often secondary to the great side story of Randy the Ram being a has-been trying to get back in, despite numerous people saying he absolutely shouldn't. I don't think it's Aronofsky's best, but it's much like Red Belt, it's definitely worth a watch. Number 3 is one that I've talked about on the show before, and that is Rocky II. It just goes above and beyond what the original set forth. The characters are increasingly more complicated and relatable, and I'd say it has easily the best finale of the entire franchise. And when I was putting this list together, I thought about something. When we mentioned that Rocky 1 and 2 could have easily been an epic, and the more I think about it, the more I kind of wish it had been. Because Rocky 2 just continued so much of what was great about the first one.
It's one of the best sequels there is.
Absolutely.
You guys really like Rocky 2.
Oh, it's not my favorite, but it is a great sequel.
Mm-hmm.
And my number 2 is Raging Bull. This is quite possibly one of Scorsese's most brutal films, but honestly, it is easily one of his best. De Niro's performance is easily some of his finest work, but what I really like about this film that gives it its number 2 for me is that it does not hold back on the brutality of boxing, even in being in black and white. It just captures the viciousness of it. As far as I'm concerned, there's never been another boxing movie like it.
Very cool. Well, my top 5 actually starts with Raging Bull. I saw this one just the other night. I try to watch at least one older movie that I haven't seen that might be appropriate for whatever current week the top 5 is. And I think Justin kind of said it best when you said how brutal it is. And it is a great movie. I loved the black and white. I mean, I thought since it takes place, in the 40s and 50s, and it's got the same vibe that you would have watched on TV back then. Boxing was huge on television in its infancy. So I thought that was cool. And, to be fair, I think everybody knows Raging Bull is a classic, and it probably is among the best in this genre, the professional fighting movies. However, the cool thing for me about these top 5s is we don't have to necessarily go by what we think is the quote-unquote best. It's, our own kind of personal opinion, regardless of maybe what our grades would be or whatever. So that's why I put it at my number 5. It was a little brutal for my taste, a little too vulgar. Classic Scorsese there. My number 4 as well is The Wrestler. The one thing you didn't hit on, Justin, with that is not only does Mickey Rourke give a great performance, but it is Marissa Tomei's finest hour. She's great in My Cousin Vinny. She won the Oscar for it. And you guys probably don't remember this, but at the time that she won the Oscar for My Cousin Vinny, people thought, like, oh, well, Jack Palance must have read the name wrong because she was the last one in the category, and she didn't deserve to win, and this and that. Well, you would never say the same thing again if you saw The Wrestler. She just knocks it out with that, and it truly is a great story. Number 3 for me is the original Karate Kid, and that is the 1980s version. I don't mind the Jaden Smith version. I thought Jackie Chan was good, but Mr. Miyagi,
you can't
come
top
on,
it.
No,
Pat Morita, you can't top it, and obviously Ralph Macchio does a fantastic job.
Great job.
I've only seen this movie a couple of times when I was younger, but the lines from this movie really endure over 30 years of,
that says something.
generations being introduced to it, wax on, wax off, and I get called Daniel-san still all the time from that movie.
Does it ever annoy you?
Never.
Good.
Never. So that's my number 3. My number 2, I know Justin won't love, but that is The Fighter. I think The Fighter is a fantastic movie. I've seen it 3 times. I saw it in theaters and instantly fell in love with it. I don't think it's a big secret that I'm a huge David O. Russell fan after these last few years. It started with The Fighter and continues on with Silver Linings Playbook and American Hustle. He gets the best out of his actors than many, many other directors. And I think in a different director's hands, it could have been a much lesser movie. You wouldn't have cared about the characters so much. And I just love it. It's my number 2.
Well, unfortunately, it's been a long time since I've seen The Wrestler, so it didn't make my list, but I do remember it being pretty good. I definitely want to go back and watch it again. But, that being said, this is my list. My number 5 is The Hurricane. Now, I guess you could say that's a little bit of a stretch since the movie is mostly about a man's search for freedom as well as being framed for a murder, but the core of it still is about the man's philosophy of boxing, as he wrote a book which basically paralleled his struggle for freedom, the 16th Round, along with various boxing metaphors in his career. I thought it's just a fantastic movie, possibly my favorite Denzel Washington movie, and being that it is about the middleweight champion of the world, I think that it's an appropriate place on this list. Great movie. See it if you haven't. My number 4 is Rocky. Rocky is honestly probably one of the best boxing movies ever made, and I love this franchise. It's iconic. It's a great story about the underdog, and I think it really is kind of one of those pinnacle films about the underdog and just the fight to the top. That's a great place for the center of a story like that. Rocky is amazing. Number 3 is Raging Bull. I will admit it's not one of my favorite Scorsese movies, but for a dark, brutal film about kind of the seedier elements of boxing, I think it really stands out. It is very well done. And my number 2 is a movie that's I didn't think I would actually end up putting on a major list, but when I really thought about it, it did have a huge impact for me, and that's $1 Million Baby. I thought it was a really, really amazing story. Hilary Swank gave probably her best performance. Clint Eastwood, Morgan Freeman. It's just great. I mean, female boxing, it's just something you wouldn't really see, a subject that's really talked about much on film. And I think that That movie really hits a lot home in terms of true brutality, and it's tragic, but it's very, very well done.
I decided to watch Raging Bull instead of $1 Million Baby, just because I figured, well, it's the all-time classic, and they're both a bit lengthy, so I didn't really have time to get to both of them.
I think you'd probably like $1 Million Baby more.
I probably would. And I'm a Hilary Swank fan as well.
You'd like it more.
I don't doubt that, actually.
I mean, I'm glad you watched Raging Bull. Probably the one to watch first, but you definitely should watch $1 Million Baby.
Oh, yeah. I'll get to it for sure.
Or MDB.
MDB, as I call it. All right, well, Justin, your number one, which I think I know what it is. I thought about watching as well, but...
I don't know what it is.
It would have been the third on my list. Oh, I'm sure you know what it is.
My number one... Cinderella Man.
Damn it.
Just kidding.
Wait, what? It's not?
It is not.
Wait, you love Cinderella Man.
Whoa. Wait, hold the phone. We're doing top 5 professional... Wait, and Cinderella Man's not on there? What's going on?
I think he's just making up this list as he's going
on.
There's no way Cinderella Man's not number one.
Come on, man.
Number one, Jet Li's Fearless.
Wait a minute. Whoa.
Jet Li's character is a professional fighter, but what really makes this film a number one for professional fighting movies comes from his transformation over the duration of the overall film, which is incredible. Yes, it captures the potential viciousness of the martial art of wushu, but it also heavily emphasizes the beauty of it as well, in many different scenes. And what I really love about this movie, in contrast to a number of different martial arts films, is it's really unquestionably one of the most accessible I've ever seen. It's just got a great story, and you can pretty much show it to almost anyone, and they'll be hooked onto it. I remember, 4 or 5 years ago, we were watching on TV. My mom came down for, a couple scenes, and she was right in on it, and she does not watch martial arts movies whatsoever. It's just an absolutely great movie. I wish Jet Li had retired on it and just called it a day, but unfortunately that didn't happen. But just a great movie that I cannot recommend enough, and ironically enough, gets even better with the director's cut.
Joe, you're familiar with this movie.
I am, actually. Yeah.
I've heard of it.
I saw it a while back. I thought it was really good. That's a surprise, actually.
Yeah, it surprised me.
You're right. I would have thought Cinderella Man. Actually, we talk about it every week.
Thinking that from the word go. Well, my number one is the original Rocky. Much like the Sylvester Stallone top 5 we did earlier, I sort of limited my Rocky intake for this list.
Rocky 1 through 4.
I'm a fan of the series. I'm the first two, yes, and Rocky Balboa are all great, but the first one is, for me, the standout. It introduces you to the character. I know Justin prefers the second one because the character arc in the first one you don't like as much. You think he's kind of jerky.
I do, actually.
Yeah, that's what he said when we did the Sylvester Stallone top 5.
Well, I thought that was his character growth.
But it's, to me, that's one of my favorite parts of the movies, actually. I really like his character development, and it's proof that, even though we've had these awful movies lately that he's written, Sylvester Stallone at one time could pick up a pen and really write something, and it was Rocky.
It's funny, you think about that, and I was surprised to find out. I think I'd seen Rocky before I watched it. I kind of went through the stream of seeing all the Rocky movies a couple years ago, and I had learned then that he had actually been a big part of the story.
Right.
He actually wrote it. Now I just had a hard time believing that because I always thought of Sylvester Stallone as being, basically
kind of a dummy,
like Arnold. Yeah. He's big, he's strong, he's a tough guy, but I didn't think he could actually write something that brilliant. I was honestly shocked, but that's a great choice.
Well, and he's writing the Apollo Creed movie, right?
Which I'm really excited about.
No Homefront.
No, I don't. Let's leave Homefront out of everything. But he wrote Rocky Balboa also, which was
pretty good.
I mean, he's written, I guess, all of them.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Which is why he wanted to do Rocky Balboa, because even he knew Rocky 5 was just a piece. Yeah,
it's the worst one.
Yeah. All right, Joe, what's your number one on the professional fighting?
Guess. What do you think it is? You guys know what it is. And you really know what it is.
Karate Kid.
That's right. My number one is the first Karate Kid because there is some professional fighting in it. And, I mean, it was going to happen. I love this movie. It's pretty much everything Dan said about it in his list. I mean, it's just really rewatchable. It's lovable. Great characters, good acting, just memorable lines, and the fights are actually pretty good, even though they might be questionable in their accuracy.
Well,
Not entirely sure about leaving yourself wide open for a crane kick would be the ultimate attack. Love The Karate Kid. Awesome movie about fighting. And the second one was good, even though it's not technically professional. And the third one is horrible. Never see it.
how about the next?
That has Hilary Swank in it.
It does. Any good? She's been in some stinkers.
You know, it's funny. I think some people consider that to be a bad movie. I actually liked it when I saw it. I know it's probably one of the weaker installments, but it's definitely better than 3, which basically destroys everything in the first 2 movies. So,
Okay.
That's a step forward at least.
The third movie seems to be the worst in many series. I was just thinking about this the other day.
The trilogies.
At some point, we should, not even trilogies though, because like Shrek, the fourth Shrek was way better than the third.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like at some point we should do a top 5 worst third installments, because I think there's some good ones for that list.
An interesting concept.
I have to finally watch Godfather Part 3.
Oh,
That's true.
definitely.
All right, well, now we're going to get into our triple feature, and that includes our new classic, which is a movie called Thin Ice. Our old classic, chosen by Justin, is Mary and Max. And, of course, as we mentioned, our Oscar nominee A to Z is Ali. In Thin Ice, Greg Kinnear is a Wisconsin insurance salesman named Mickey who falls into desperate times financially and personally and is willing to do just about anything to sell a policy in this dark comedy. Mickey heads to the farmhouse of an old man, Gorvey, played by Alan Arkin, and Mickey tries to squeeze what little money Gorvey has to get him an insurance policy. While he's there, an instrument appraiser from Chicago, played by Bob Balaban, stops by the house to appraise an old violin that Gorvey has and says its value is upwards of $25,000. When Gorvey goes away on a trip, Mickey tries to steal the instrument along with an ex-con alarm salesman, played by Billy Crudup, who Gorvey had hired that day. The two stumble into major complications when one of Gorvey's neighbors stops by and, suspecting something is up, the alarm salesman bludgeons him to death. From there, things go even further downhill. Now, we just had a dark comedy last week for New Classic with Jack Black's Bernie, and while this isn't quite in the same league as that one, it does have a certain kind of Fargo-type charm to it, and with the murder side plot, it certainly isn't too far a cry from Bernie either. Kinnear is very likable even when desperate times call for desperate measures, though I don't think that his voiceover is at all necessary. Arkin turns in a great performance, and I wish it's the kind he would do more often, instead of the stale grudge match type character we've been getting from him lately, and Crudup is also a standout. The movie is slow to start, but once it gets going, it is a winning black comedy with a great twist, and I give Thin Ice a B. Joe, you were new to this one. Let's hear your thoughts on Thin Ice.
All right. Greg Kinnear, Bob Balaban, and Alan Arkin are all actors I enjoy, and all of them do a good job in this fairly good dark comedy. The plot is intriguing and does keep you interested as things go from bad to worse. I have to admit that I thought I had the story pegged until it went a completely different direction. It takes a character who is at first kind of unlikable, but who you root for more and more as the story progresses, simply because you don't want him to suffer a continuously worse fate. Though I did enjoy this film, I did feel that the twist was both rather predictable and also rather rushed and confusing in its final explanation. Still, I would not mind at all watching this again and trying to find hints of the final twist. It's a fairly solid movie. I give it a B.
Very good. Yeah, boy, that twist. It's one of the better ones I've seen lately.
It's a good twist.
Yeah.
But I thought the explanation was so rushed that I was kind of confused.
Yeah.
I was like,
it could have been explained a little better.
They could have fleshed that out a little more. I think it would have gotten a higher grade then, but all in all, though, good twist.
Yeah. Justin, Thin Ice. Now, you had seen this one before.
I had. The most important aspect of having a great mystery is making it solvable, yet still keeping the audience questioning what really is going on. This is where Thin Ice heavily falters in its narrative. While Greg Kinnear is great as the charismatic, albeit manipulative insurance agent, is hilarious, particularly when the dark humor starts setting in. However, it doesn't make him necessarily likable, but helps when we see his life begin to sputter out of control. One could argue that this film goes a little too far with its dark humor, but the decent, albeit partially predictable twist does help with that. Overall, Thin Ice is a short and fun dark mystery comedy that just needed a little bit more mystery to help complement its humor, and I give it a B-.
normally I try to mix up the new classics a little better than to do black comedies in a row, but the rule of new classics is it has to be within 2 years, and Thin Ice came out 2 years ago this weekend. So time was of the essence. I wanted Joe to check it out because I thought he would like it.
Yeah, it's my kind of movie. I liked it.
Yeah. Justin, did you say in your review one of the great things about a mystery is figuring out who did it and all of that stuff? See, I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that you could have a great mystery shown right from the start who does it and what's happening, and part of the fun of the mystery is how they're going to get caught or
Columbo.
what happens to them. Yeah, like a Columbo.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of TV shows that will do that.
There are different styles.
And that's kind of their hook.
But a great mystery is like a puzzle. You can have all that, but the pieces should be able to be put together ahead of time, should that be the case, or at least be able to go back and see, okay, this is how that happened. In the case of Thin Ice, it's just story, dark humor story, big reveal. But it doesn't give you any like background to go back and say, okay, I can appreciate it more because they did this in that scene.
So you watched it again, you didn't really pick up on anything?
No.
Yeah, but because of how the twist is, and the things that they show you, like Joe mentioned, it is a little bit rushed, but they show you some things in there that you can pinpoint and say, oh yeah, okay, that happened. You know, and that's, I guess, maybe where Greg Kinnear's voiceover
Made sense.
does make sense. You know, in the beginning it's sort of unnecessary, but where he's sort of analyzing all of that, so you do have all of those pieces.
You do, but there's not really anything from the beginning of the film or the middle of the film that says, okay, yes, this happened, therefore I can understand I can see how it all comes together. And instead, it's just them literally holding your hand and explaining it all to you, which is fine, but it's also ridiculously rushed and, to be honest, kind of partially unnecessary.
How is it unnecessary?
Yeah.
I'm fine with a twist. I'm not fine with a twist making sure that I understand how it's so clever and how it's so intricate. Let me find that for myself. Don't rely heavily on hand-holding.
Kind of like in Usual Suspects, where you find out the twist and you don't, and you're like, oh wow, this really makes sense, but you're not really sure about everything. So basically, it's like you're saying you would have preferred one good reveal just to make sure that this was obviously explained so that everything else could be explained in further viewings.
Not to mention, in the case of Usual Suspects, even though I do have some kind of big issues with that twist, they give you ways to actually see where it might be heading ahead of time, which I really like. Well, in the case of Thin Ice, it's just...
The thing about it is I can kind of see where he's coming from, is because I felt the movie didn't seem like it was going to have a plot twist. I know that sounds a bit odd, but it's like you said, the movie kind of had a Fargo-like feel, where it was just kind of a dark comedy leading to a darker and darker consequence, and probably ending on a bittersweet note. That's what I thought was going to happen. He's going to have to kill somebody or something, and it's going to be like kind of this awkward ending. So the fact that it was kind of a little twist to make everything a little bit lighter at the end there, I did like that because it was sort of surprising, but it didn't really feel like the film was designed for that necessarily. You know what I mean? It didn't really seem like it was supposed to be a mystery.
I do, and if it makes you feel any better, the ending was radically changed from the original.
I bet.
I don't know what the original ending was, but...
Well, the fact that you say that makes the fact that it was kind of rushed and brief and just sort of forced in there make a little more sense, because you can tell it just didn't quite jive with the rest of the film. Like, I liked it. It did make me want to go back and see if I could find some of those points. But it did feel like the mystery element, the plot twist, was kind of sort of shoot in there at the last minute. I thought that was kind of a slight negative.
Well, I do think, though, they needed to sort of, you know, I don't really want to say handhold, but, you know, how they did that, because it went pretty deep, and I think if they hadn't done that, we wouldn't have known if they hadn't said, well... this person did this person did this person did this.
A common style in a lot of narratives is they would have the character look at something or hear a piece of a conversation, then have a flashback of like maybe a scene with no like sound, just like a brief second to kind of make you think, oh, this was a bit off. This is a bit off. So maybe like showing you where to look, but not revealing everything.
Okay.
So I think
that makes sense.
That's what I'm saying. They could have done it in a slightly subtler way, and they could have spread it out a little more. Like he slowly reveals things, and then the twist dawns on him when it's completely revealed. that might have been handled a little better if it was integrated more into the actual narrative from like the midpoint, whereas, like we said, kind of tacked on at the ending there. And that's why you said you thought they explained everything properly. They said all these things, but I was kind of like, whoa, slow down a second.
Well, again,
slow down
my second time, so...
Here's the other problem I have with it. During said twist, there are no actual intricacies to his actual twist. He's relying solely on what he thinks happened.
That is true.
Which makes it even more bothersome as to whether or not...
But doesn't that speak to your point of you don't want the hand-holding? Because the movie isn't then telling us everything. You're right, it's telling us everything from his perspective.
Which is kind of one of the things that makes him sort of a narrator you can't really totally trust. And he is sort of that shoddy salesman. Like maybe he made all this up just to sell some. I thought that might have been a possible mini-twist.
Either way, come the third act, something seemed a bit off. And that severely hurt the film.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give it about the same grade.
Yeah.
B level.
I thought it was good. I'd love to watch it again.
Yeah. All right, well, up next is our old classic, and we've been talking about this on the show recently in our top 5 Philip Seymour Hoffman performances. So Justin brought Mary and Max to us for his pick for old classic.
Thank you, Dan. Mary Daisy Dinkle, played by Bethany Whitmore in child form and Toni Collette as she gets older, is a girl living with her dysfunctional family in Australia. However, as she becomes curious about the adult world, she decides to mail a person at random for answers, and finds a lonely and obese New Yorker with Asperger's syndrome named Max Horowitz, played by Philip Seymour Hoffman, and begins a lasting friendship with him. It's always fascinating when a movie embraces innocence, but doesn't hold back on the mature themes that envelop the overall film. This has been evident in several of the films that we've enjoyed and discussed on Film Fanatics, particularly Mud, and this film is another great addition to that list. Despite seeing much of the film from Mary's point of view, she's constantly bombarded with darker aspects of her life that she simply does not understand. Something Max also suffers from, and Hoffman brings out brilliantly in one of the best depictions of autism I have ever seen. As such, the chemistry Mary and Max have over the duration of the 90-minute runtime is deadpan hilarious, heart-wrenching, and always engaging, seeing how a simple gesture one does impacts the other. Alongside that, director Adam Elliott's signature claymation style that won him an Academy Award for Best Animated Short is all the better here and helps complement the overall tone here. Mary and Max is a great character study that I thoroughly enjoyed, and I hope gets more of a following over time, and I give it an A.
Joe, what do you think of Mary and Max?
This film stands as a great story of connection between two very unique individuals. The movie has an amazing, captivating atmosphere which really isn't that odd or off-putting despite the claymation stop motion, which is fantastic in and of itself. The voice acting is also phenomenal here from everyone, especially the late Philip Seymour Hoffman, who gives possibly his best performance in a voice which was completely unrecognizable to me. Besides these facts, the editing is superb and the music is beautiful and haunting, adding to an already great tone. What holds it all together, though, is a compelling, witty, funny, and thought-provoking story which is bitterly honest but strangely uplifting. I'm very glad I saw it, and I would certainly consider it to be a must-see for many moviegoers, and I happily give it an A+.
Ooh, you really liked it.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you had seen this movie prior to Philip Seymour Hoffman's passing, would you have placed it at number 1 on your list like Justin did?
Probably.
Wow.
I thought it was an amazing performance.
Very good. Well, I don't think it's his greatest performance. It landed at my number 5, but it's definitely one of the great undiscovered roles of his career, to say the least.
Absolutely.
And the same goes actually for Toni Collette, who is near unrecognizable as well as Mary. It's not your average animated film, that's for sure. Like you both mentioned, the claymation style is really great, gives it a different look. It also doesn't play like other animated films. It goes deeper and darker. And the story of these two meeting as random pen pals and having the story told entirely through, other than some narration by Barry Humphries to tie things together, the letters that Mary and Max write each other is another thing that makes this a very unique movie. As for the look, you guys mentioned the claymation, but another bold choice was the color being mostly black and white, but with these little pockets of color. Mary's mother's lips, a package of chocolate, and other things here and there. It gets super dark in the final half of the film, and though the whole film is kind of dark, the end is a little bit too much, I thought, even for the tone of the rest of it. It just seems like there's maybe also some padding between the middle of the end, some of the things they mention in their letters. I don't know, it seemed like a little bit too long even at just 90 minutes. But the friendship between the two title characters and how it's written and the look of it is what makes the film stand out more than anything else. And I give Mary and Max an A-. Definitely worth a watch.
All in that a high range.
For sure. Yeah, finally we got a movie we all gave it, very enthusiastic grades to.
Something to keep that average up a little bit. Man.
Yeah. Joe mentioned something about, it's unrated on Netflix, so it kind of looks like a kid's movie because of its claymation style, just be warned, it is an intense movie and not really for children.
I just feel like that's an accident waiting to happen because of that. Some kid will just click on there and be like, "Oh, look, animation," and I just feel like that's going to be an issue somewhere.
Yeah. Well, maybe the black and white will deter them. Kids don't love black and white.
I don't know. It depends. It depends.
All right. Well, our final movie for the week is Ali, and this is our Oscar nominee A to Z. Will Smith as Ali and Jon Voight as Howard Cosell both got nominated for this one in 2001. And what we watched on the show, just because it's the DVD version that I have, is the director's cut, which is only about 7 or 8 minutes longer than the original, but it replaces about 20 minutes entirely and tacks on about 27 minutes total. So it's slightly different than the version you guys might have seen if you saw it in the theaters. Joe, let's hear about Ali.
All right. Thanks, Dan. Ali, a 2001 biographical film directed by Michael Mann following the famed boxer Muhammad Ali, played by Will Smith. The story takes place in a 10-year period of Ali's life from 1964 to 1974. Many events are covered, including his capture of the heavyweight title from Sonny Liston, his conversion to Islam, criticism of the Vietnam War, his banishment from boxing, his return against Joe Frazier in 1971, and finally concluding with his retaking the former title from George Foreman in the Rumble in the Jungle in 1974. It also discusses the pivotal upheaval in the U.S. at the time, including the assassinations of civil rights leaders Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. This film is an ambitious work which is, as you might have guessed from my plot summary, trying to say a great deal. That is really the biggest problem with this film. Its content is so massive that the story of the man is often overshadowed. I will admit that Will Smith's performance is excellent, as he really gets those specific inflections down. He really seems to become Ali. The cast overall is really excellent as well, for the most part, particularly from Jon Voight, who is unrecognizable as Howard Cosell, as Dan mentioned. And the cinematography and editing are really spot on. This does get interrupted, however, significantly by an overbearing soundtrack and a script that honestly has no real focus. Though the film captures the feel of the 1960s America very well, it doesn't fully capture the life of the main character. It is as if Ali is simply the conduit from which the audience is meant to view these occurrences, rather than a fully fledged character. If this movie had chosen to be about the Civil Rights Movement, or the Vietnam War, or the 60s in general, with Ali being a focal point, then maybe it should have been given a different title. Michael Mann knows how to capture your attention and create a truly epic atmosphere, as well as getting good performances from his actors. However, this film didn't know what it wanted to be. Whatever it was, I'm not entirely sure it was actually about Ali. Still, it was a pretty good effort. I give it a B-.
Yeah, when we were originally divvying up which of us would lead which movie for the triple feature of the week, Joe said he would take Thin Ice originally, and of course Justin had Mary and Max, it was his pick, leaving me with Ali. But as we were watching Ali, Joe, you kept making all of these incredibly insightful comments, and they were so well stated, so we all kind of agreed we need to switch so you can take Ali.
Thank you.
And there isn't much that you mentioned I don't agree with. I mean, you really captured it while we were watching the movie. You captured it now. So I won't hit on too many of those things. But I will say, having grown up not really paying attention to sports, even I knew about ABC's Wide World of Sports and Howard Cosell and his voice and his distinctive speech patterns. I could not believe, even after we realized who it was, that Jon Voight was portraying him in this movie.
You know what? I'll be honest. I thought that, I don't know if it was just because of his performance or the makeup, but I thought that that was a bigger noticeable element, more so than Will Smith.
I did too.
You know?
I did too. Now, unfortunately, for you guys, Cosell passed away when you were toddlers, so all you saw was the great performance and the
amazing
disguise,
makeup.
the makeup of Jon Voight. But for me, it went absolutely beyond an impression. He transformed into this man. It's, for me, the best thing I've ever seen him do in his career. Jim Broadbent won the Supporting Actor Award in 2001 for some movie I never heard of called Iris, so I can't speak for whether he deserved it or not, but the performance by Jon Voight is flawless. Will Smith, though, also did a great job as Ali. Like you mentioned, it's one of the few times he actually changed his speech and voice significantly, so that if you were just listening to it and not seeing him, you might not even recognize who it is. Which is impressive, because Smith does have a very distinctive voice after being in so many films and his years on television.
And speech pattern.
And yeah, speech pattern. So I thought that was pretty impressive.
I'm not sure if you're going to mention in your review. If you are, then go ahead. But what did you think about Jamie Foxx in the movie?
He's the next sentence.
Okay.
So I'm glad you asked. Jamie Foxx was all right, but it was definitely a fair performance at best. I think of all of the actors in the film, he probably was one of the weaker ones. Now, that being said,
to be fair, do you think he knew what his character was?
Well, his character is very poorly written. He kept popping up like 20, 30 minutes after we last saw him, and I kept saying to these guys, wait, Jamie Foxx is still in this movie? Like, I thought...
He kept teleporting.
I don't know what I thought happened to him, but he just seemed to, like... His character just seemed to go away, not talked about, not thought about, and then all of a sudden, there he is.
I'm here for you, man.
The front seat of the ring, and I'm like, what? Wait,
where'd you come from?
Where did he come from?
Who are you?
So, so I can't blame it all on Fox, you're right. But...
Though I will blame whoever cut his hair. Cause
that haircut
that was ridiculous.
Was not good. I mean, I guess it was for the time, but...
Well, no, I'm just...
Even then...
No, the thing that annoyed me was that, as we said, great makeup for Jon Voight. Like, amazing. Some of the best I've ever seen. Oh, how to make him look like this random guy. Buzz him to make him both bald. Wow, that's... Wow.
Yeah, that haircut was awful.
Great guys. Great job.
But overall, Ali just didn't all connect, and Joe pretty much hit on why not. It was an enjoyable film, though, and a good telling of one of the most famous sports figures of all time. I just wish it was about a half hour shorter, and some of the slow or more unnecessary parts were shortened or taken out. I'd like to sit down at some point with the original theatrical version and see how I feel about that one. For this version, though, it is a B. And Joe, you mentioned you felt that maybe the singing and the gospel choirs, that part was maybe the non-theatrical part, maybe the Michael Mann added part.
From what I saw and remember of it, I know it's trying to set this tone, but I just thought that it really slowed things down.
You had seen parts of this movie before, and you didn't remember any of that.
There was an extended scene, I think, where at the beginning of the film that I remember just being longer, and maybe my memory's a bit off. Don't go by that completely, but I do remember seeing pieces of this movie, and it did go a slightly different direction. I felt like it was definitely a little more about the man, from what I remember.
And I wish that it was, like you said.
Like, I'll be honest, from what I saw and what I was expecting like an A caliber movie.
Yeah,
and I
as well.
Didn't get that, so...
Justin, what'd you think of Ali?
Similar to our review of Mandela Long Walk to Freedom back in Season 1, Ali suffers from trying to do so much within the confines of a 2-hour and 40-minute runtime, and as such, only a few things feel adequately covered. Much of the beginning, particularly the opening 20 to 30 minutes of the film, feel incredibly muddled and only offer a snippet of Muhammad Ali's personal life. It's kind of a pity given that many of these could have lent themselves to fantastic dramatic beats, notably his relations with Malcolm X, played by Mario Van Peebles. However, these can be partially overlooked by great performances from Smith as Ali, and an absolutely impeccable performance by Jon Voight. That said, despite these flaws, the film does get better as it goes along, and as such, it ends up being a film about an incredibly influential fighter that could have been so much more, but for that, I will give it a B.
And you hadn't seen this before either, Justin. You and I completely new to it, so I'm interested to see at some point the theatrical cut to see what's different.
I would too.
Yeah, I think the running time, like I said, is about the same, but with 20 to 25 minutes completely changed.
I do agree. I think that the last hour or so of the movie was actually pretty good.
Yeah, once it
became more about
Ali,
him. Yeah.
Like, and even his working relationship with Cosell. They kind of had that back and forth. Whereas Ali was known for his mouth and his his sort of rhyming statements, and Cosell kind of fed off that. And so I thought that aspect of the story was really good too, other than, of course, his fighting. But yeah, the first half hour, 45 minutes was slow and...
Well, it's funny. You even mentioned this a little bit. One thing I think that was a little disappointing about it for all of us is that it was only focusing on this one part of his life when they didn't even mention his issue with Parkinson's, I think it is.
Yeah, I mean, it sort of...
I felt like there was a lot more they could have covered about this man.
Which he developed...
Not long.
Like in the 80s. I mean, it's been 30 years now that he's
I just know that a big part of his life was helping to fight that and struggle with that. And that was a big part of his life that they didn't even mention. And I felt like that was a waste.
And the thought is that he, got his Parkinson's through his boxing.
Which so might have been a commentary on sort of maybe some of the negative aspects of it. I just feel like there was some wasted opportunity there.
Definitely tied in with the story, if they wanted it to. All right, well, listen, at least we all got positive grades for everything in the triple feature.
Yeah.
Thank goodness for that.
Hopefully next week we'll be able to recommend some of the new releases.
Yes.
But at least you know which ones to stay away from for the time being. All right, but that is going to wrap it up for the show this week. We'll have next week our Oscar reactions after the big award show. The triple feature, of course, and an all-new top 5 as well. So lots of things to look forward to in next week's show. If you have not subscribed yet to the YouTube channel, like we said at the top of the show, please do so. We certainly appreciate all the support there. And start thinking about what movies you want us to review for the old classic slot, because in a few weeks it's going to be time for Listener's Choice once again, and you can get us those on the YouTube channel, of course. Our Facebook group up and running. We've got the 5-word reviews posted there weekly, as well as a link to the week's podcast, and that's on Facebook at Film Fanatics with an exclamation point, and our Twitter, of course, up and running as well at Film Fanatics Pod. We'll see you back here next week. Bye!